I'll never forget the summer I spent working on the Queen Mary. The iconic ocean liner, now permanently docked in Long Beach, California, was a fascinating and eerie place to explore. As a tour guide, I spent countless hours leading groups through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, sharing tales of its storied past. One evening, after the last tour group had departed, I decided to explore the ship on my own. I wandered through the deserted staterooms, imagining the lives of the passengers who had once called them home. As I reached the engine room, a chill ran down my spine. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, and the machinery seemed to hum with an eerie, otherworldly energy. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise coming from one of the darkened corners. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the source of the sound. As I peered into the darkness, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing near one of the massive turbines. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its face was obscured by darkness. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and a chilling aura seemed to emanate from its presence. Fear gripped me as I realized I wasn't alone. I tried to back away, but my feet seemed frozen to the spot. The figure turned and looked at me, its eyes boring into my soul. I screamed, the sound echoing through the deserted engine room. The figure seemed to vanish into the darkness, leaving me alone with my terror. I rushed back to the main deck, my heart pounding in my chest. I told my colleagues about the encounter, but they dismissed it as a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen something truly terrifying. I began to research the history of the Queen Mary, hoping to find evidence of other paranormal encounters. What I discovered was chilling. The Queen Mary was said to be haunted by the ghosts of passengers and crew members who had died on board. There were countless stories of unexplained noises, cold spots, and even sightings of ghostly figures. I realized that I was not alone in my experience. The Queen Mary was a place of dark secrets, a vessel haunted by the spirits of those who had met their end on its decks. From that day forward, I approached my work on the Queen Mary with a newfound respect for the ship's history and the spirits that still lingered within its walls. And every time I heard a strange noise or felt a cold draft, I couldn't help but wonder if I was being watched by the ghostly figure I had seen in the engine room. Haunted by the encounter with the shadowy figure, I decided to return to the Queen Mary and investigate the paranormal activity firsthand. Armed with an EVP recorder, a camera, and a healthy dose of skepticism, I boarded the ship. As I wandered through the engine room, the same eerie feeling washed over me. I set up the EVP recorder and began to ask questions. "Is there anyone here?" I asked, my voice echoing through the deserted room. There was no immediate response. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Then a faint whisper seemed to emanate from the darkness. "Help me," the voice said, its tone filled with despair. I played back the recording, my eyes wide with disbelief. The voice was clear, unmistakable. It was the same voice I had heard during my previous encounter. Over the next few days, I continued to investigate the Queen Mary. I set up the EVP recorder in different parts of the ship, hoping to capture more evidence of paranormal activity. The results were astounding. The recorder picked up a variety of strange noises and voices, some of which seemed to be intelligent and purposeful. There were whispers, murmurs, and even a few coherent sentences. I shared my findings with a few friends who were interested in the paranormal. They were skeptical at first, but as they listened to the EVP recordings, their expressions changed. "This is incredible," one of them said. "It sounds like there's really something going on here." I knew they were right. The evidence was undeniable. The Queen Mary was haunted, and I had captured it on tape. As I continued my investigation, I became more and more convinced that the shadowy figure I had seen was a real ghost, trapped within the ship. I felt a sense of responsibility to help it, to free its tormented spirit. I began to research the history of the Queen Mary, hoping to find clues about the identity of the ghost. I discovered that many people had died on board the ship over the years, from passengers and crew members to stowaways. Perhaps one of these souls was still lingering on the ship, unable to find peace. With the help of a local historian, I was able to narrow down the possible identities of the ghost. I discovered that a young woman named Emily had died on board the Queen Mary during a particularly stormy voyage. Her body had never been recovered, and it was said that her spirit still haunted the ship. Armed with this information, I returned to the Queen Mary. I went to the spot where I had first seen the shadowy figure. As I stood there, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that Emily's spirit was still trapped within the ship, and that I had to do something to help her. I closed my eyes and spoke aloud. "Emily, if you're here, please let me know. I want to help you." There was a moment of silence, then a faint whisper filled the air. "Help me," the voice said, just as it had before. I knew what I had to do. I turned and walked away from the Queen Mary, my heart heavy with sorrow. As I left the ship, I looked back one last time. A single tear rolled down my cheek as I realized that I would never forget the haunting encounter with Emily's ghost. It was a sweltering summer night in upstate New York in 2003, and the electricity had just gone out. I was alone in my small apartment, the sudden darkness casting an eerie silence over the room. As I sat there, my mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. Curiosity piqued, I got up to investigate. As I approached the hallway, the darkness seemed to intensify, swallowing me whole. Then I saw it. Standing at the end of the hallway was a figure, its form shrouded in darkness. It was the silhouette of a man, but something about it was off. It was too tall, too thin, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. My heart pounded in my chest as I recognized the figure. It was my father, who had passed away years ago. But this wasn't the father I remembered. This figure was gaunt and skeletal, its eyes filled with a chilling intensity. I froze, my mind racing. Was it just a trick of the darkness, a hallucination brought on by the sudden power outage? Or was it something more sinister? As I watched the figure, it began to move towards me. Its steps were slow and deliberate, each one a chilling reminder of the darkness that surrounded me. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure was almost upon me when the lights flickered back on. The figure vanished, leaving me alone in the suddenly illuminated hallway. I collapsed to the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew what I had seen was real. It wasn't a hallucination or a trick of the light. It was the ghost of my father, returned from the beyond. The experience had left a deep mark on me. I had faced my fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged changed. And I knew that I would never forget the night of the blackout when I had seen the face of my dead father, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. I don't usually talk about this, partly because it sounds insane, but mostly because I don't want to relive it. But I guess that's what makes it believable, right? If something like this happened to you, you wouldn't exactly shout it from the rooftops. It was last winter. I was staying at my parents' old house for the holidays. It's this creaky, old Victorian place on the outskirts of a small town. My parents had moved into a retirement community a few years ago, but they kept the house, so I was alone there. The thing is, I grew up in that house. I knew every corner, every weird noise the pipes made, every draft that would sneak in through the windows. I never felt weird or uneasy there, not even as a kid. But this time was different. The first night, I chalked it up to the cold. The house was practically an icebox when I arrived, and it took hours for the furnace to kick in. I kept hearing these strange thuds coming from upstairs, like someone was dropping something heavy. The house settles, I thought. It's nothing. But as the night wore on, the noises got louder, more deliberate. It wasn't just a house settling. It sounded like footsteps. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, maybe the wind. But that's the thing, there was no wind that night. It was dead still outside, almost eerily so. I decided to go up and check, more to prove to myself that I was being ridiculous than anything else. As I climbed the stairs, the sound stopped. Dead silence. The kind that makes you hyper aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. I reached the landing and everything looked perfectly normal. But there was this feeling. Like someone was there watching me. I couldn't shake it. It felt heavy, oppressive. I did a quick sweep of the rooms, trying to be as thorough as I could without letting on that I was freaking out. But nothing. No signs of anyone, nothing out of place. I went back downstairs, made a cup of tea, and tried to brush it off. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning I found it. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I noticed something on the table. At first I thought it was just a shadow or a smudge, but when I got closer my heart sank. It was a handprint. But not just any handprint, it was small like a child's. The thing is, it wasn't in dust or dirt. It was in ash, like someone had dipped their hand in cold, dead ashes and pressed it onto the table. I didn't have a logical explanation for it. I cleaned the table obsessively, scrubbing until it looked like new. But that night, the noises came back. Louder, more insistent. And this time I could hear something else whispers. Not words, just the sound of someone speaking so low that I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could tell they were angry. I stayed up the whole night, too scared to close my eyes. I just sat there in the living room, every light in the house on, listening to whatever was moving around upstairs. Eventually it stopped just before dawn. I thought I was going insane. The next day I found another handprint, this time on the mirror in the bathroom. Same size, same ash-like residue, only this time there were streaks around it like something had been dragged across the glass. That was it. I packed my bags and left that day. I didn't even lock the door. I couldn't stay there another night. I don't know what it was, maybe a ghost, maybe something else entirely, but I haven't been back since. My parents eventually sold the house and I've never mentioned what happened to them. But I can still see those handprints in my mind. I can still hear those whispers when it's quiet at night. I'll never know what it was, and I don't want to. I don't usually talk about this, mainly because I don't want people to think I'm crazy, but also because even thinking about it makes my skin crawl. But there are some things you can't just forget, no matter how hard you try. It was about 3 years ago during the dead of winter. My friend Mark had just moved into an old house on the edge of town, the kind of place that had a history. You know, the type: high ceilings, creaky floors, and a basement that you just knew had seen some things. Mark was always into that kind of stuff though. He loved the idea of living somewhere with a past, so he snapped it up for a good price. I remember the first time I visited him there. The house was cold, much colder than it should have been, and there was a smell. Not like rot or mildew, just this faint, almost metallic scent that seemed to hang in the air. Mark didn't seem to notice, so I figured it was just me being weird. The first sign that something was off happened not long after he moved in. He started having these strange nightmares, violent, disturbing dreams that left him drenched in sweat. He'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced that something was in the room with him. He brushed it off as stress from the move at first, but the dreams kept getting worse, and then things started happening when he was awake. Mark was always a pretty laid-back guy, but he started getting angry. Like really angry over the smallest things. He'd snap at me and our other friends for no reason, and his temper would flare out of nowhere. I remember one time we were just hanging out in his living room, and he suddenly threw his glass against the wall, shattering it. When I asked him what was wrong, he just stared at me, like he didn't even recognize me for a second. Then he snapped out of it, apologized, and tried to laugh it off, but it wasn't the kind of laugh you want to hear. It was cold, almost mocking. We all started noticing the changes in him. His voice would sometimes take on this low, guttural tone that didn't sound like him at all. He began to withdraw from everyone, spending hours in the basement, which he'd kept locked up tight. Whenever I asked him about it, he'd get defensive, saying he just needed space. One night, he called me in a panic. His voice was shaky, almost like he was out of breath. He said something was wrong, really wrong, and begged me to come over. When I got there, I found him sitting on the floor in his living room, surrounded by dozens of candles. He was pale and his eyes were almost black. He kept saying something about the thing in the basement, how it wouldn't leave him alone, how it was trying to take over. He told me he'd been hearing voices, not in his head, but out loud. They would whisper to him, telling him to do things, terrible things. He tried to fight it, but he said it was getting harder, like something was inside him, pushing him to the edge. He told me he felt it trying to take control and he was terrified of what would happen if it did. That was when I heard it, this low, almost growling noise coming from the basement. Mark's face went completely white and he whispered, "It's here." I didn't know what to do, but I wasn't about to go down there. Instead, I tried to get Mark to leave the house with me, but he wouldn't budge. He said it wouldn't let him leave. And then right in front of me, his entire demeanor changed. His face twisted into this horrible sneer, and he started laughing, but it wasn't his laugh. It was deeper, crueler. He stood up, and when he spoke, it wasn't his voice that came out. It was something else, something wrong. He said things that no friend would ever say, things he couldn't possibly know about me, personal stuff that cut deep. I backed away, but he just kept coming, eyes locked on mine, that horrible laugh echoing in my ears. I don't know how I managed to get out of there, but I did. I ran out the door and didn't stop until I was back in my car. I tried calling Mark after that, but he never picked up. A couple of days later, I found out he was in the hospital. They said he'd had some kind of breakdown, but when I went to see him, he was different. He wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't even look at me. It was like the Mark I knew was gone, replaced by someone else. I was on a solo trip through Europe, and I'd ended up in this charming little town in the heart of France. The hotel was an old stone building with a creaky elevator that looked like it belonged in a museum. I'd heard the stories, of course, the old world charm, the creaky floors, the possibility of the supernatural. But I'm not the type to believe in ghosts. I'm more of a practical person. It was late and I was tired after a long day of exploring. I got on the elevator to head up to my room, and as the doors closed, I noticed a woman standing in the corner. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes with a white apron and a stern look on her face. At first, I thought she was a guest, maybe someone who was really into historical reenactments or something. As the elevator started to move, I tried to make small talk. "Lovely evening, isn't it?" I said, hoping to break the ice. She didn't respond, just stood there, staring straight ahead. I started to feel a little uneasy. Maybe she was one of those people who didn't like to talk to strangers. The elevator stopped at my floor, and I stepped out, turning to say goodbye. But when I looked back, she was gone. I thought maybe she'd stepped out just before the doors closed, but then it hit me. There was no other floor between the ground floor and mine. I went back to my room, feeling a chill run down my spine. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I was tired, maybe I'd seen a reflection or something. But the image of that woman, standing there in the elevator, wouldn't leave my mind. The next morning, I decided to ask the front desk about the woman. Maybe she was a new employee or something. The receptionist looked at me like I was crazy. "There's no one working the elevator," she said. "Actually, there's a story about an old woman who used to work here back in the 1800s. They say she still haunts the building." My blood ran cold. It was the same woman I'd seen in the elevator. I spent the rest of my stay in that hotel terrified. Every time I got on the elevator, I expected to see her again. And every night, I had the same dream, the elevator doors closing, and there she was, standing in the corner, watching me. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. I swear to you, this is no joke. This is a true story that happened to me and my friends. We're still talking about it to this day. One night, a few weeks after the incident, I was alone in my bedroom trying to sleep. I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the attic. My heart raced as I remembered what had happened at Willow Creek Manor. I decided to investigate, armed with a baseball bat. As I crept up the stairs, the scratching grew louder and more insistent. I reached the attic door and hesitated, my hand trembling on the knob. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The attic was dark and dusty, the only light filtering through a small window high above. I peered into the gloom, my eyes straining to adjust to the darkness. And there it was, standing in the far corner of the attic, bathed in a sickly, ethereal glow. It was the cloaked figure, its form more distinct than ever before. Its eyes, two glowing orbs of pure darkness, seemed to pierce through the gloom. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the full extent of my predicament. I was trapped in my own home, hunted by a sinister entity that seemed determined to torment me. As I turned to flee, I tripped over a loose floorboard and fell to the ground. The cloaked figure lunged forward, its outstretched arms reaching for me. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I raced down the stairs, my fear propelling me forward. I burst into my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. Panting and trembling, I leaned against the door, my heart still pounding. I looked around the room, searching for a weapon, anything to protect myself. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted a baseball bat leaning against the wall. Grabbing it, I braced myself for whatever might come. The door creaked open and the cloaked figure stepped into the room. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity and its skeletal form seemed to shimmer in the dim light. I raised the baseball bat, my grip tightening around the handle. As the figure lunged towards me, I swung the bat with all my might. The bat connected with its chest, sending it flying backward. It landed with a sickening thud, its form writhing on the floor. Exhausted and terrified, I collapsed onto my bed, my mind racing with the events of the night. I had faced my fear, confronted the darkness, and emerged victorious. But the experience had left its mark on me, a haunting reminder of the supernatural forces that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. It was a crisp autumn day in Northern Ireland, and my friends and I decided to take a hike through the ancient forests that dotted the countryside. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the sunlight began to fade, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine, and I felt a sense of unease wash over me. I looked up, and there it was, a tall, shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to make out its features. It was humanoid in shape, but its face was obscured by darkness. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, and a chilling aura seemed to emanate from its presence. Before we could react, the figure vanished into the trees, leaving us standing there frozen in fear. Our eyes widened in shock as we realized we had just seen the ghost of the late Robin Williams, the famous comedian and actor who had tragically passed away just a few weeks earlier. As we continued our hike, the feeling of unease lingered. We tried to convince ourselves it was just a trick of the light or a figment of our imagination, but the encounter was too vivid, too real to dismiss. The following day, I checked the news and confirmed that Robin Williams had indeed passed away. The eerie encounter in the forest had left me shaken to the core, and I knew I would never forget it. My friends and I are avid campers, so we decided to take it upon ourselves to venture on a hike through Mountain Rainier, located near Seattle, Washington. The trail was steep and challenging, but the promise of breathtaking views at the summit kept us going. As we ascended higher, the trees grew denser and the sunlight began to fade, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. We had been hiking for hours when we realized we were lost. Our map was no longer helpful, and the trail markers had become scarce. Panic began to set in as the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the forest into darkness. We tried to retrace our steps, but the dense foliage and the fading light made it impossible to navigate. Fear gnawed at us as the temperature dropped and the wind howled through the trees. Just as we were about to give up hope, a faint voice echoed through the woods. It was a man's voice, deep and resonant, calling out our names. We followed the sound, our hearts pounding in our chests. As we emerged from the dense undergrowth, we saw a figure standing at the edge of a cliff. It was a man, his face obscured by the darkness. A chill ran down my spine as I recognized the voice. It was the same voice that had called out to us from the woods. "Follow me," the voice telepathically said, its tone commanding yet reassuring. At least that's how I felt it was communicating. We hesitated, our fear warring with our desire to escape the forest, but something about the voice compelled us to follow. As we walked, the man's voice guided us through the woods, leading us towards the light. We followed his instructions blindly, trusting that he knew the way. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged from the forest onto a familiar trail. Relief washed over us as we realized we were safe. We thanked the man, but he was gone, vanished into the darkness. As we hiked back to our campsite, we couldn't shake the feeling that we had encountered something extraordinary. The voice that had guided us through the woods, the eerie figure that had appeared out of the darkness, it was all too much to dismiss as coincidence. We knew that we had experienced something truly supernatural, something that would forever be etched in our memories. And as we sat by the campfire that night sharing stories of our encounter, we couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder at the mysteries of the world. It was Halloween night, and my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of town. We were young and foolish, seeking thrills and excitement. Little did we know our curiosity would lead us into a terrifying encounter with the supernatural. We set up the Ouija board on a weathered gravestone, our hearts pounding with anticipation. As we placed our fingers on the planchette, a chill ran down my spine. The atmosphere was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. We began to ask questions, our voices barely audible above the rustling leaves. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the planchette began to move, spelling out words in a shaky, uneven handwriting. "Who are you?" we asked. The planchette spelled out a name, Thomas. "Thomas, are you a ghost?" we inquired. The planchette hesitated, then spelled out, "Yes." We were thrilled. We had contacted a real ghost. We continued to ask questions, our excitement growing with each response. But then something strange happened. The planchette began to move erratically, spelling out words that were dark and disturbing. It spoke of hatred, revenge, and death. One of my friends, Alex, was particularly affected by the board. He became withdrawn and sullen, his eyes filled with a dark, unsettling intensity. He started acting strangely, lashing out at his friends and family. Concerned for his well-being, we decided to seek help. We contacted a local priest, a man known for his expertise in exorcisms. The priest arrived at Alex's house and performed a cleansing ritual. He prayed over Alex, sprinkling holy water and reciting ancient incantations. But nothing seemed to work. Alex's behavior continued to deteriorate. Desperate, we took Alex to a mental health facility. The doctors were baffled by his sudden change in behavior. They conducted numerous tests, but they couldn't find any physical or psychological explanation. Finally, a psychiatrist suggested that Alex might be possessed. The idea was terrifying, but it seemed like the only explanation for his erratic behavior. We contacted a renowned exorcist who agreed to help. The exorcism was a harrowing ordeal filled with terrifying rituals and chilling encounters with the unseen, but in the end it seemed to work. Alex's behavior returned to normal, and the darkness that had consumed him seemed to fade away. From that day forward, we vowed never to play with an Ouija board again. The experience had taught us a valuable lesson about the dangers of dabbling in the unknown. As for Alex, he never fully recovered from the ordeal. The encounter with the dark entity had left its mark on him, a haunting reminder of the terrifying forces that lurk beyond the veil of our reality. It was a stormy night in Normandy, France. The wind howled, whipping the rain against the windows of the lighthouse where I was stationed. As the keeper of this solitary outpost, I was used to the isolation, but tonight the storm seemed to have an eerie quality to it. I'd been feeling a strange presence in the lighthouse for several days. A cold draft would sweep through the rooms, even when the windows were tightly shut. Strange noises echoed through the halls, like footsteps and whispers. I dismissed it as the wind, or perhaps the creaking of the old building. But tonight, as the storm raged outside, the presence seemed to intensify. I was sitting in the lighthouse's main room, the flickering light of the oil lamp casting strange shadows on the walls. Suddenly, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the top of the lighthouse. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I climbed the narrow, winding staircase. At the top, the wind howled even louder, whipping around the lighthouse like a banshee. I peered out into the storm-tossed sea, my vision blurred by the rain. And then I saw a shadowy figure standing on the edge of the lighthouse, silhouetted against the raging storm. The figure turned and looked at me, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure seemed to vanish into the storm, leaving me alone with my fear. I descended the stairs, my mind racing with what I had just seen. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun was shining and the sea was calm. But the memory of the shadowy figure remained with me. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I had seen something truly terrifying, something that defied explanation. I tried to tell my friends and family about my encounter, but they dismissed it as a trick of the light or a product of my imagination. They couldn't understand the fear and dread that had consumed me that night. But I knew the truth. I had witnessed the paranormal firsthand, and the memory of that terrifying encounter would haunt me forever. The encounter with the shadowy figure had left a deep mark on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was lurking within the walls of the lighthouse. I began to document every strange occurrence, every unexplained noise, every eerie sensation. One evening, as I sat alone in the lighthouse, a cold draft swept through the room, even though the windows were tightly shut. A chill ran down my spine as I felt a presence watching me. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just as I was about to dismiss it as a trick of the mind, I heard a faint whisper like a voice carried on the wind. It was a woman's voice, soft and mournful. "Help me," it whispered. Fear gripped me as I realized the voice was coming from the lighthouse itself. It was as if the very walls were speaking to me. I spent the rest of the night listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice continued to whisper, telling me stories of a tragic love affair that had ended in heartbreak and despair. The woman, it seemed, was trapped within the lighthouse, her spirit bound to the place where her love had died. Over the next few weeks, the ghostly whispers became more frequent. I would hear them at all hours of the day and night, sometimes accompanied by strange noises and unexplained phenomena. One night, as I was preparing for bed, I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. I turned, but there was nothing there. Then I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. I slowly turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. There, standing in the doorway, was the shadowy figure I had seen before. But this time its face was clearer, its features more distinct. It was the face of a young woman, her eyes filled with sadness and despair. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice filled with a haunting desperation. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't ignore her plea for help. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the figure into the depths of the lighthouse. We wandered through the labyrinth of rooms, the woman's voice guiding me. Finally, we came to a small, hidden chamber. As I entered, I saw a faint glow emanating from a chest. I opened the chest, and a wave of cold air swept over me. Inside, I found a small, ornate box. As I picked it up, the woman's voice grew stronger. "Take it," she whispered. "It's the only way to free me." I hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then I remembered the stories I had heard about haunted objects. Perhaps this box held the key to freeing the woman's trapped spirit. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside, I found a small heart-shaped locket. A single tear rolled down my cheek as I realized the significance of the object. It was a symbol of the woman's lost love. I took the locket and held it up to the light. As I did so, the woman's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "Take it to the sea," she whispered. "Cast it into the waves and I will be free," I nodded, my heart heavy with sorrow. I knew what I had to do. I rushed out of the lighthouse and down to the shore. The waves crashed against the rocks, the wind howling around me. I held the locket up to the sky, and with a heavy heart, I tossed it into the sea. As the locket disappeared into the waves, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The woman's voice grew weaker, until finally it was gone. I stood on the shore for a long time, watching the waves. I knew that the woman's spirit was finally at peace. And as for me, I had faced my fears, confronted the darkness, and emerged victorious. Let me fill you in with a little bit of detail before I start. Sumner Street has a lot of death. This means young and old. Most of those deaths were gang-related killings as well as murder. I grew up here watching people die in front of my house. As years passed by and 15 years later, strange encounters started to happen. It was like these souls had nowhere to go but into our house. My room was on the first floor, and one summer when it was extremely warm outside in the early morning, my windows were wide open. I woke up to seeing a mist floating in midair that I couldn't even understand. I stared at it for 5 minutes and noticed it started receding, so I tried to touch it, and a face appeared before it ultimately vanished out through the window. After that day, strange things started happening, like my electricity went out, so I had to go into the basement to turn on the breakers. That's when... My name is Cannully, and I wanted to mention another place in Eugene, Oregon that is haunted. I was staying with my cousin almost 6 years ago now at her apartment in downtown Eugene. I was with her when she decided to rent the place, and having seen it prior to her moving in, there was something decidedly creepy about the closet in her bedroom. I helped her move in and met the neighbors downstairs, who said they had also noticed something weird about the stairs that led to the second floor. The stairs were interior and led to my cousin's apartment. They also backed my cousin's closet. This was a converted single-family home prior to the owners deciding to rent. My cousin moved in without incident, but also has a thing about being in denial with otherworldly presences. I returned to my home a day after she moved in, but went back to see her again the next weekend. She worked the 9 to 5 shift at a health food store, so I was left by myself for the day, and being that I'm more of a night person, I never heard her leave. I was sharing her bedroom, and the closet was on her side of the bed. I got up sometime around 11 a.m., and as I was doing my morning yawn and stretch, I distinctly heard someone say my name from somewhere around 2 inches from my ear. I could feel breath on my neck. To say the least, it scared the bloody hell out of me. I thought, though, that it might be one of the people from downstairs, because we had all made fast friends by this point. I went down and said good morning to everyone, and then asked who had played the prank on me. They adamantly denied doing anything. And when this happened to me, 4 of the 5 people living down there were at work at the time. The 5th person, who was home at the time, was a woman, and the voice I heard was definitely male. I don't know what haunts this home, but I don't think it was an unfriendly spirit. I think it wasn't too happy about not being properly introduced, really, and I never heard it again. I've visited your site off and on for a couple of years, but I had not read any of the stories until today. I work at a housing complex in southeastern Louisiana. It's hood-operated low-income housing, and the site is about 35 years old. Some residents tell me it was built on part of a pasture and part of a cemetery, and in fact, there's a large unused area of grass and scrub trees called the horse pasture. I've been unable to verify the cemetery part, which they may be telling me because they know I like creepy stuff. Anyway, I started suspecting the main office here is haunted about a year ago. Over the years, it has hosted schools, dances, provided space for administration and maintenance, and this is where the residents can come to pay their rent or to report any problems. We also host things like Bible study and various arts and crafts groups. Because we have residents who come by sometimes to conduct lengthy business, we have children's books and a few toys in the lobby. Much of what goes on I have put down to the electrical system being older than me and just wonky. We started joking that the building was haunted, but it seems to be more truth than joke. Doors will open and close by themselves. There is a coffee maker that needs to be unplugged at night because it turns itself off and on. Also, occasionally we'll hear things like children laughing or people speaking in whispers. I am thinking about conducting a formal investigation of the haunting after what happened Friday. My office has a window that looks out into the lobby and out the front window. There's a small table where we always put the toys when they get scattered around. One of them is this thing. I don't know how to describe it, but it's a big plastic caterpillar covered with large buttons and knobs that light up and make different sounds when you push or turn them. Since it's right next to my window, I'm used to hearing it when the kids are playing with it. I hadn't heard anyone come in the front door, but I heard the caterpillar go off. It was quiet for a few minutes, then played some more sounds. I went to my window to see who was out there, but there was no one I could see. I blew it off until I was looking right at the toy, and it began to make noise by itself. Thinking it was just faulty, I looked for a switch and I thought I'd turned it off, until it started making noise again. It did this at random times for over an hour, including right before we locked up for the night, when a coworker and I were both watching. I have also been in the building late at night and heard printers that we turned off start up and run blank paper. Disconnected lines on the multi-line phones will light up and ring, and our printing calculators will advance paper without being touched. Some of this may be faulty wiring or other non-ghost occurrences, but we've come to the conclusion that the place is haunted. If you want, I will keep you posted about what I find.
Hey Phantoms, it is time to subscribe, do the like, and share if you like the videos. You know, this is a little bit of a longer video, brand new, scary stories for your enjoyment. Really hope you got a kick out of this, and if you got to the end of the video, please let me know by saying Oreo in the comment section, because, well, I have Coca-Cola Oreos, because apparently that's a new gimmick they're doing, flavor thing. Anyway, love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.